The first thing that we have to do when we win the House and the Senate is we need to end the filibuster. If you think that every law other than budgets and confirmations is exactly the way that it should be for the rest of time, then you support the filibuster. So if we actually want to have a shot at carrying out the vision, the writing our values into law, and building a country where everyone's rights and freedoms are protected, where everyone has a fair shot in the economy, where people can afford childcare, where everyone can get the health care that they need, all that stuff requires changing the filibuster. It should be done on day one the next time Democrats have a majority in the U.S. Senate.
Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to be with each and every one of you here at the Commonwealth Club World Affairs Council for a very special evening. I have known Ben Wickler for a very long time when he was at Move On and then to become chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party. I am a former chair of the party a long time ago, maybe even before Ben was born. I was former chair of the California Democratic Party, and I've seen them all. And Ben is absolutely the best, absolutely the best. And what a special treat for us to be here and to be with him and to have as a special guest, Bradley Whitford. You probably know him from West Wing, or some of you may have known him from West Wing. West Wing, where he was such a tremendous star, 3 Emmys. He received 3 Emmys for his work on that and other things. But what you may not know about him is from Madison, Wisconsin, so he knows. Oh, okay, we got a Wisconsin crowd here. And he has had a close relationship with Ben for a long time now. But when his starring role on West Wing really helped shape what he did after, whether it was a woman's right to choose, LGBTQ rights, the environment, all kinds of progressive causes he has been a part of. So what a special treat for us to have him be moderating this conversation with Ben. Now, what you should know about both of them being from Wisconsin is that Wisconsin has been a place where the Republicans tried every terrible thing, whether it was redistricting or all kinds of things that they would later take to the rest of the country. So they saw firsthand up front how to deal with that. And that's what has made Ben so capable of writing this book. When he was chair of the party, he won 10 of the 13 tough races that they had there. Whether it was the governor's race, Joe Biden for president, Governor Evers, Tammy Baldwin for Senate, again, when it was going to be a close race. But on top of that, the judgeships, those races were very, very important because they affected redistricting. So when people say, what's the plan? How do we go forward? This book is aptly named, This is the Plan, How to End America's Meltdown and Save Democracy. So we'll hear more about that in just a moment, and I have a lot more to say, but I want to hear what they have to say, so I'll be brief and just say that, again, I've seen close up what Ben has done as chair of the party in Wisconsin. He was simply the best and attracted support from all over the country, enabling him to provide the victories that were very essential to the well-being of the people of Wisconsin, especially with those judgeships, how important they were. So are you ready for all this? Yeah, are you ready? So now, please join me in welcoming to the stage Ben Wickler and, of course, Bradley Whitford.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
San Francisco!
San Francisco.
Oh, we love to preach to a choir. Somebody once said, I forget who said it, but there's a reason you preach to the choir, so that they will sing. And we need everybody to sing at this moment. Briefly, what hospital were you born in? University?
So I have to tell you, I was conceived in Wisconsin. I was born in Washington, D.C., and then I turned 1 in Wisconsin. So I am not quite born and raised in Madison, Wisconsin.
I was conceived and born in Wisconsin. And I went to East High School.
I went to West High School.
Yeah. That's where the parliamentary nerds went. The hockey champions went to East High.
But we can bring, the tides together to unite around some common principles and values. And I think if we can do that, then all of us can do that.
Then the country can do it. If you don't know about Wisconsin, I want to let Ben talk. But Ben's experience, which I have seen going back there every cycle since 2020, it is a microcosm of what is happening. There is so much to learn from what happened in Wisconsin. Wisconsin could have been very easily, was basically Florida. The Wisconsin Dems, and we'll get into how this was done, prevented that from happening. And one of the great minds of the 12th century, Scott Walker, took over in the wake of Citizens United. And it was a time, and I am going to shut up. It was a time when I think a lot of people who believe in what we believe in thought that democracy was inevitable. We thought that an expanding definition of the circle of freedom was inevitable. And meanwhile, the people who we're dealing with now understood that politics is the way you create your moral vision. And they were working the levels of government to create the nightmare that we're living in now. And we have to participate from the ground up, which was Ben's experience. So tell us, Ben, what's the plan?
Well, Bradley Whitford, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. And thank you, Speaker Emerita, so much for everything you've done and this very kind introduction. And to all the folks here at the Commonwealth Club and the Global Affairs, the World Affairs, Commonwealth Club World Affairs thing that we're at.
Yeah. It's
So Wisconsin was kind of a test run for Project 2025. I write that Project 2025 is reheated Project 2011. Citizens United happened, the Tea Party wave in Wisconsin and a whole bunch of other states. Republicans targeted state legislatures because they knew something that Democrats had kind of forgotten at that moment, which is the rules of democracy are written at the state level. The Constitution puts states in charge of running the elections, not the federal government, despite all of Donald Trump's executive orders that he keeps losing court cases about. And so they came in, and in my state, we flipped from a blue trifecta to a red trifecta. Wisconsin was the state that was the first place to be described as a laboratory of democracy in the 100 years before in the progressive movement. But now it became a laboratory for autocracy. The right started by smashing unions, divide and conquer. First went after public sector unions, which were born in Wisconsin, then the private sector unions. They passed what one judge called the most restrictive voting law in the country. It was the SAVE Act state level edition. They gerrymandered the living daylights out of the state as part of a national plan called Red Map. And the idea was to rig the maps so that even if the public didn't like what they were doing, and the public didn't like what they were doing, that they would never lose power. And they had a far-right state Supreme Court that rubber-stamped every terrible and often illegal thing that Scott Walker and the Republicans did, kind of like everything that's happening at the national level right now. And it very nearly worked. It very nearly severed the connection between what people vote for and who leads the government and what kinds of policies actually come through.
And I just want to interject quickly. Wisconsin, there was a thing called the Wisconsin Idea. You sort of referenced this, but much of the New Deal was basically workshopped in Wisconsin. And Wisconsin is not just an electoral swing state, it is an ideological swing state. And the right was targeting this, I think, partially because of that.
Explicitly. It was the kind of crown jewel. It was the birthplace of the Republican Party as a radical anti-slavery party in the 19th century. That was in Ripon, Wisconsin. The birthplace of the capital P progressive movement, fighting back against the robber barons in the Gilded Age. It was the first state to have progressive taxation,
Unemployment
insurance, workers' compensation. Wisconsinites created the first, it was called the Legislative Reference Library, the first government agency that actually had academics and experts studying the effects of laws to help lawmakers. The Congressional Research Service is based on that in Wisconsin. The people who led that then were hired by FDR and wrote the Social Security Act, and then later Medicare and Medicaid. All of that came out of Wisconsin. Earth Day, first state to ratify the 19th Amendment, first state to guarantee equal rights for women, for protections against discrimination for LGBTQ people. San Francisco, good work on that. Wisconsin, beat you on the state level. All this stuff. And
cheese curds.
Cheese curds also leads America in cheese production. And we also consume more brandy than the rest of the country combined in our state. We were the first state to repeal prohibition. So there's a lot to love in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So they targeted that state in part to show that they could do it there.
Right.
There was the Bradley Foundation, which is one of the biggest far-right funders, is based in Wisconsin. There's this far-right tradition too. Tail gunner Joe McCarthy, the Red Scare, came out of Wisconsin. The John Birch Society is headquartered in Appleton, Wisconsin. We have Tammy, I know.
It's very San Francisco.
So we have the state with the biggest contrast between the two senators. We have Tammy Baldwin, who's amazing, and we have Ron Johnson.
Who is not.
Not amazing. So they did all this stuff, and then they exported tons of this around the country, and now Trump is trying to do it at the federal level. And there was this existential question of whether they had fully thrown the state off the cliff, whether it was no longer going to be a place where the people could have a government that was by, of, and for them. And the only way that changed, as we learned, was it was not through one heroic candidate. It was not through one watershed election that changed everything. It was through a movement of thousands and then more than 1 million people rolling up their sleeves, building a permanent campaign to fight for every level of power in the government so that we could rewrite the rules to put the people in charge instead of far-right billionaires who are trying to rip the state apart. And that's what we need as a country.
Yes. Because we don't just get a democracy, we got to make it every day, right?
Yes.
And tell me if I'm wrong, and this is like an oversimplification, but you kind of talk about this in the book. I think part of the issue is they are basically pursuing a business agenda. They understand that politics is the way you create your moral vision. If their moral vision is a business agenda, then politics is not an every 4-year ethical extracurricular. It is every day that they are working on it. And I think we tend to have not been the people who are making a democracy every day because of some optimistic assumptions about human nature and the course of humanity, and because we're not pursuing a business agenda, which is what we're up against, and getting people to work at this not every 4 years, not for the person you fall in love with, but as a relentless culture of political participation.
That's exactly it. So, yes. So how do you do that? I ask myself.
Yes.
I
wrote
in the book, in Wisconsin, the state party chair before me launched a program that I fell in love with and ran for chair so that I could expand and kind of try to supercharge in every way that I could. It started with something that actually was built around a candidate. In 2008, there was an amazing campaign that elected Barack Obama president of the United States. I don't know if anyone was involved in that campaign. If you were, good job. That was great.
I would have voted for him 3 times. It's a joke. Go ahead.
No. So in that campaign, Barack Obama did not have a lot of institutional support at the outset, but he talked to people who'd been innovating in community organizing and came up with this organizing model called the snowflake model. The idea, not liberal snowflake melting at the first sign of criticism. The snowflake model, the idea is if you look at a snowflake, we have a lot in Wisconsin, not as many here, but let me just tell you what it's like to have snow. If you look at a snowflake, it has all these little like points connected to other points. It's a lattice that expands out. And the idea with the snowflake model is that you build teams of people in a neighborhood who work with each other to then recruit more people and build the team out that can then take responsibility for that neighborhood, for talking to everybody there and figuring out who's on the fence and making sure they get to the polls. It's neighbor to neighbor, friend to friend, actually rooted in your local community. And that model led to millions of people. I think they had 2.2 million people volunteer in the re-elect in 2012 for the Obama campaigns. And it won elections at all levels. It was incredible. That's how Wisconsin became a blue trifecta. The problem was that after the presidential campaign was over, everyone went back to real life. And after Trump won Wisconsin in 2016, and it was the tipping point state, and so Wisconsin put Trump over the top, which I'm not proud of, it's kind of a painful thing. The then chair rediscovered that model and said, what if we did that on a year-round basis, not around one candidate, but around every election in our state? And raised money when an election was far away and started hiring organizers to go out, not to knock on doors, but to meet with people in coffee shops and ask them, would they become a neighborhood team leader? Could they get some friends together, launch a team? Everyone would train together and start actually building relationships so that in election happening a year away, they could actually have that kind of grassroots force. And those teams started building for local elections, state legislative elections, a state Supreme Court election in 2018, and they powered what in politics is called a field margin. So organizing, I talk a lot about organizing in the book. It's the superpower that every one of us has. Organizing can't turn a landslide in the opposite direction into a victory on our side. But it can take an election that you're about to lose by a hair and turn it into a victory by 1 percentage point. It can push you over the edge when elections are close. And part of my argument in this book is that if you step back from the fact that in California, you know who's going to win the general election, but you look at the places that are right on a knife's edge, and they're often races no one's paying attention to. They're obscure races for state Supreme Court in Wisconsin or North Carolina. They're a state legislative seat. In Mississippi, they just broke the Republican supermajority. Races like that, where a few hundred votes, a few thousand votes, can tip a critical power structure that winds up writing the rules for how national democracy works. And you put your organizing effort into those fights, you can change everything. And in Wisconsin in 2018, despite everything Scott Walker had done to rig the political system, despite a huge avalanche of money on the right, the people knocking on doors neighbor to neighbor across our state powered Tony Evers into a victory by 1.1 percentage point. Which in Wisconsin, more than 1 percentage point, we have a word for that. It's a landslide. It was like we had grabbed the last branch on the side of the cliff after being pushed off. And then we were pulling ourselves up by our fingernails. So I moved home in 2018. My wife and I and our 3 kids moved back to Wisconsin. I volunteered a ton for Governor Evers, for Tammy Baldwin, for state legislative candidates that year. We won that victory. I remember being at the governor's victory party, and we thought we were losing until the middle of the night when they finally counted the absentee ballots, which became a familiar refrain in elections after that. Had no Trump to declare victory beforehand. Then the legislature came in and convened a special session and ripped powers away from the governor and from the attorney general. And then the right-wing Supreme Court rubber stamped it. It was like we were holding onto the cliff face and they were stomping on our fingernails. And that's kind of when the fight was joined for real. It was like, Joe Biden won and then they overturned Roe versus Wade. They don't stop after the election is over on the right. And we can't either. And I was elected chair of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin the next spring. And the march began, this fight by fight by fight. It turned out that to unrig the gerrymandered state legislative maps, the U.S. Supreme Court threw out a federal lawsuit, refused to do anything about gerrymandering. The governor vetoed Republicans' attempts to gerrymander the state, and then our right-wing state Supreme Court chose the right-wing maps that the governor had vetoed as the solution to the impasse between the governor and the state legislature. Every path was closed by this machine that the right had built to be able to grab back power even when voters tried to throw them out, until we figured out how to win a majority on our state Supreme Court. And this is something that the right had total ownership of for years. In 2017, no Democratic candidate even ran for state Supreme Court because it was so clear the right had the money and the power and the focus on those races. But this movement that had worked to elect Joe Biden and worked to elect Governor Evers in 2023, in a year when most people weren't thinking about
We learned
elections.
how to pronounce Protasewicz.
We learned how to pronounce Protasewicz, Janet Protasewicz.
Yes.
As I told people, any amateur can say Janet, but it takes a Protasewicz.
Very good.
And we pulled it off. It was the most expensive judicial election in American history at that time. We won the majority.
But do you understand what a huge achievement that is? To nationalize a state Supreme Court race, not once, but
three times.
three
while I
times.
was chair.
Yes.
So we
That
win.
doesn't happen.
We win. And then the Republicans don't give up. They decide they're going to impeach Janet Protasewicz with their state legislative majority before she can rule on a single case. Preemptive impeachment. It was an attempt to nullify the election. Again, a preview for things we've experienced at a national level. And the neighbor-to-neighbor teams we'd built all across the state, all these people who'd been in motion continuously now for years, they started rising up and organizing, going through the neighborhoods of Republican state legislators and putting flyers under every windshield wiper on the cars, talking about how Republicans wanted to overturn the election. We turned it into a national political firestorm. They backed off. The Supreme Court de-gerrymandered the state. We actually had free and fair legislative districts, and then Elon Musk decided he wanted to re-gerrymander our state. So Elon Musk, the world's richest man, flush with power, running the White House, dismembering USAID and condemning millions of people to death around the world, threatening primary challenges against anyone from either party who will get in his way, comes to Wisconsin to show the little people of Wisconsin that he can lord it over them, puts on a cheese head, which
Desecrated it.
desecrating the sacred uniting symbol in our
Yes.
community. It's a great sign of disrespect. And it had Novelty Publishers Clearinghouse $1 million checks to show us that we could be bought. He tried to bribe Wisconsinites to vote with him. And in that moment, you might just to bring you back to an unpleasant moment in our recent history, everyone was caving in the spring of 2025. Law firms were cutting deals. Universities were stumbling over each other to placate the Trump administration. People in both parties, elected officials, were trying to avoid the R of Sauron. And when Trump came to our state, if he'd been able to win that race, then he could have bought any race that he wanted. He had an unlimited bank account. And the people of Wisconsin who'd been fighting in year after year after year, and Susan Crawford, who on the campaign trail started saying, I never dreamed that growing up as a little girl in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, I'd be up against the world's richest man in a fight for democracy. The people of Wisconsin rose up and threw out Elon Musk and his preferred candidate by 10 percentage points, and he was booted out of the White House starting the next day. It was the overnight victory, years in the making.
Yes.
And the thesis of this book is that all of us, everyone here, everyone you know, can build that kind of movement nationwide that can fight for power at the local level, in the states, in state Supreme Courts, and then ladder up to the House and the Senate and rewrite the rules of our democracy so that the people and not the Elon Musks of the world are in charge of this country. That's the plan of this book.
It has been driving me crazy for a long time. I've said behind your back, we need to nationalize what is happening in Wisconsin. By the way, I want to interject. You can clearly see this, if you haven't read the book, it's a joy. He does not have an irony deficiency. And it's part of the joy of the work in Wisconsin is the community that has been created. But I would go out of my mind because I'm watching us lose the House. I don't know if you're aware, Speaker, but but I'm watching and I'm like, oh, this is close. Oh, where are we losing it? We're losing it in races in states that don't have this infrastructure that we assume are blue, like this one. Or, in New York. And I just hope that the party can nationalize this kind of from the ground up work.
Well, so let me tell a story of how.
And talk about the really close one.
I'm going to talk about this. So there are several hundred people here tonight.
Yes.
The entire U.S. House majority that Republicans have only exists because of a race that was decided by 401 votes. And it was not a House race. In North Carolina in 2020, there was a state Supreme Court race that was not nationalized. Republicans poured in money, and they won by 401 votes. It was 1/100th of 1 percentage point of all the votes cast in that race in that state that year. The guy who won became the Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court and rammed through a reversal of a recent previous decision and re-gerrymandered that state after he got a majority and added 3 Republican House seats in North Carolina. That is the size of the entire Republican House majority nationwide right now. If we had won that North Carolina state Supreme Court race, then Hakeem Jeffries would be the Speaker of the House, and all of Donald Trump's terrible ideas, including his $1 trillion cut to healthcare, would have gone out the window. This spring, this May 19th, there was a state Supreme Court race in Georgia. If we had won that race, then we could have flipped the majority on the state Supreme Court in Georgia in 2028 before the next presidential election. And there's a kind of new life and energy in the Georgia Democratic Party. There's been a decade of extraordinary work led by Stacey Abrams and many others in Georgia. They've done extraordinary things. But the whole country did not tune in to that state Supreme Court race in Georgia. And even though more Democrats voted in the gubernatorial primary that was happening on the same day, a lot of them didn't vote in the Supreme Court race, and we lost by 2.2 percentage points. There are levers of power that are invisible unless you look under the surface of what's in the news, that every one of us has the power to be able to pull and to change. And part of my goal in the book and my goal with this tour is to say, look under the surface and you realize that there are enormous victories that we can have if we can build a team here and a team across the country. And Christine Pelosi has built this team who's here with us tonight of folks who call into Wisconsin and phone bank in these local elections across the country. If we can do that work, then we can take on these fights that wind up affecting everything. There's a huge push, and rightly so, to win the House this year. If just in the House races, the total number of votes that would have moved the House majority, 7,309. That's a number of votes that everyone here through your phone banking, your donations, your volunteering and work could move. And we must win the House majority. We can and must win the US Senate majority. But in 2026, there's also going to be fights for state legislative chambers and for state Supreme Court seats, including another one in North Carolina. We absolutely have a shot to win. If we win those, it's states that write the rules for how elections are conducted. States can dictator-proof themselves before 2028. If we can win unified control of Wisconsin, which we finally have a shot to do that thanks to the fair maps, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, which for the first time in half a century, we could win a Democratic trifecta, New Hampshire, in those states, which will have the Electoral College votes to tip the next presidential election, we can win unified Democratic control now and put up the kinds of walls that ICE agents can't climb over to mess with elections in the next presidential race. Those might be the races that wind up having the biggest effect on what happens in the future of American democracy. And Trump is not thinking about those races at all right now. He is obsessed with his ballroom. He's obsessed with his triumphal arch and claiming victory every week or two in the war in Iran. The Republicans' eye is off the ball at this moment, which means that if we put our eye on the ball where power actually lives in races that will come down to a few dozen votes in many cases in these state legislative races on top of the work for the House and the Senate, we can change the trajectory of the story of American democracy from meltdown to resurgence, to a new reconstruction in this country that'll take a few years to play out. But that's the work. This thing that we have of falling in love with an amazing candidate, and it's so beautiful, and it's we're deeply empathetic people. So proud of ourselves for that. But I want to just offer, we can also just fall in love with each other, our fellow people involved in doing this work. If you get involved in a group of people that makes it part of your life to take action, not just every 4 years, but every few weeks, that you make it a habit. You build a club, you build a team, you join those phone banks, and you get involved. You wind up building relationships with other people who share your values, and we all look and feel our best when we're doing something in service of something bigger than ourselves. My wife and I fell in love with each other putting up posters for a protest when we were in college. And let me ask, how many people here have made a lifelong friend or fallen in love with somebody by getting involved in a cause or something bigger than yourself? All right, look around. The people with their hands up, meet those people because they are lovers and fighters, and you look great. it is possible to find joy in this work. I quote The Princess Bride a lot in the book. And it's my favorite movie in the world. Played a role in Wisconsin's resurgence.
Yes.
But there's one moment that I particularly like, which is Miracle Max is speaking to the heroes, and it's Billy Crystal, and he says, "Have fun storming the castle." And the reality is that if you want to storm the castle in a civil, non-January 60 kind of way, it's most successful when you're having fun. And my invitation to everybody is to have fun storming the castle and throwing out Prince Humperdinck and making a democracy that works for everyone.
And what are good ways for people to tangibly, where do they look for these races that they could really have an effect on if they happen to be living in a more secure part of the world?
Well, if someone, for example, happens to live in California.
Yes.
So first, there are absolutely house races here that you can go and you can knock on doors and you can
There's
get
a lot
involved.
of house.
And let's win all those house races in California. Thank you in advance for winning those house races this year.
Wisconsin 1 and 3.
And in Wisconsin, the 3rd congressional district, the 1st congressional district, which is not on anyone's radar, but we have a serious shot on a terrible Republican candidate. Also, you can get involved. I mean, in my state, the governor's race is a toss-up. We have a contested primary. Any of the candidates has a path to victory if all of us throw down and get involved. The Republican candidate, Tom Tiffany, he was part of the plot to overturn the 2020 election. He tried to throw out electoral college votes as a member of the U.S. House. The guy is beatable. He's a disaster. So help us win the governorship, the state legislative chambers. It'll make all the difference in the work and bring a smile to our Wisconsin hearts, which I know you want to help with. I write in the book about different organizations that are doing this work, zeroing in on these fights, often at the subnational level.
Yeah.
So you'll find a lot that you can dig into. And the specific thing that you can do is to listen to the words of Abraham Lincoln. So this is the best political advice. It's from 1841, Abraham Lincoln's letter to a Whig party committee in Illinois. He said, "Keep a constant watch on the most doubtful voters, and from time to time have them talked to by those in whom they have the most confidence." Which...
Emily.
Isn't
Emily the... Who's...
Yes. So I in the book talk about getting my hair cut by someone named Emily.
Well, there's different. I want you to get into, because I think you're wonderful on different kinds of voters, the gettable, the ungettable, focusing on meeting people where they are, which is very hard at this moment.
So this is it.
So
Right.
how do you do that?
So Lincoln's advice.
When people call you a commie who wants to destroy it.
So you start with the doubtful voters. And the doubtful voters are the voters who they might or might not vote, or they might vote for either party. And often, if you watch a lot of cable news, which I don't really recommend if that's your source of political analysis, but often there's this contrast between people who might or might not vote. They're probably diehards who want to see if you're going to adopt every one of their positions. On the right, if you're a Republican, on the left, if you're a Democrat, and the swing voters are the people who are centrists. And so if you're too liberal, then they might not vote for you because they might swing the other direction. And what that misses is that people who are not sure whether they're going to vote or how they're going to vote overwhelmingly are not people who have a checklist of 30 positions and they're comparing each candidate on each one of those issues. The vast majority of the time, they're people for whom politics is not at the center of their lives.
Curling.
So I write in the book that for a lot of these folks, politics is sort of like the Olympic sport of curling might be to the people in this room.
By the way, East High School had a varsity.
Oh, I'm not talking about you.
Okay.
Yeah, I know you know from curling.
Yeah.
Yeah. But for these folks,
Yeah.
curling, you might feel like it's a thing that's on TV for a few weeks every 4 years and not something you think about every day. Now, let's say I knocked on your door and I said, "Hi, I'm really involved in curling. And I need to talk to you about the Broomgate scandal." Now, we all know that curling involves you sweep with the broom in front of the granite rock that you push down the ice. But how do you feel about the directional broom heads that they tried to introduce? Don't you think that was outrageous? Kind of a violation of the whole idea of the sport to change the broom heads to make it so that they really steer the granite?
It's terrible.
Well, you and I, we know, but a lot of these folks might be like, what are you talking about? Why are you using my time? And that's how we can sound when we go and start lecturing voters about how this election is the most important election of our lifetime, and this, this violation of democratic norms that came out of the White House is so urgent, and you need to vote because democracy itself is on the line. You sound like you're from another planet. The thing that you need to do if you want to convince someone who's not sure whether to vote is to start by realizing that you know nothing about what's happening in that person's life. If they're not paying attention to politics all the time, it might be because they have a newborn or a dying loved one, or they're writing the great American novel, or whatever it is. There's other stuff happening in their lives. Their values and feelings are just as real as yours. But the thing that is whirring in your brain all the time is not the thing that is at the center of their field of view.
Or that they are unfortunately, but perhaps justifiably cynical about political discourse.
They might very well, and this happens a lot, they might feel like both parties are full of it. They might feel like politics is totally corrupt. And the idea that one side is telling the truth and the other's not, instead of both of them lying, just sounds like you're dumb and you don't understand how the world really works. There was even one guy that I met while I was knocking on doors in Wisconsin who couldn't choose between Harris and Trump because from what he'd seen, they both would do a great job. And it was really hard to choose between them. All kinds of people. They're all out there.
That's the sweetest Wisconsin.
I was very Wisconsin, and I love that guy.
Very Wisconsin. Well, they both seem great.
Yeah. But the point is, the only way to find out where someone is, what they're thinking about, is to ask them. And that is the kind of most small d democratic act there is, which is to ask somebody what they're thinking about. In Wisconsin, our neighbor-to-neighbor teams, we do what's called bridge building canvassing. Far from elections, we just go and ask people what the biggest issues are in their lives. And that's how you build trust, is by asking people questions. And very often you find out that it's something hyper-local, or very often it's something related to the cost of food or gas or medicine or healthcare. It is tangible stuff that they're experiencing day to day. And if you can connect with them about that, they're not trying to figure out where you are on a left-right spectrum and where they are on that spectrum. They're trying to figure out, does this person get me, get my life, care about me? Can they fight for me? Are they on my side? And if so, could they actually be effective if they do something? And the only way to be able to show them that you are is to learn enough about them that you can find common cause, something that you have in common that you can do together. That's the basic act of organizing.
Right.
Now, if you don't live in a place with a lot of voters who are in places where the elections are super close and who are on the fence and who trust you, if you're not the person in whom the voters have the most confidence, you can support the people who are in those places who are doing that kind of work. One technique I write about in the book, something that we do in Wisconsin, it's called polling place vote tripling, which does not have a good acronym. It's a hard to remember name, but the idea is you go to a place where the election's close, where you're at a polling place where it's mostly Democratic. You stay outside the legal boundary for electioneering. So we want to keep you out of jail. It's one of our priorities. And then after someone votes, they come out and you say, "Hi, I'm Bradley Whitford. You might know me from the, whatever your introduction is." But you say, "Thank you for being a voter. It makes a big difference. This is going to be a close election. Would you be up for texting 3 friends right now and reminding them to vote?" They're contacting someone else who trusts them. If you're in a battleground district, and a lot of people don't experience this because in most of the country you already know who's going to win the election, but in battleground districts, every screen that glows is blaring ads at you every second.
It's a nightmare.
It's a nightmare. Your mailbox is crammed with mailers. You're pursued and hunted by both parties.
We need more texts.
Yeah, if only. Everyone here is saying, if only people would text me and ask me for donations.
Yeah.
Please. The thing that cuts through is hearing from someone that you trust.
Yes.
And so if you can get someone to contact people that they trust, you can have a gigantic impact. If you have a trusted relationship with people that are on the fence, you can have a huge impact. It's called relational organizing. It is the oldest thing in politics. It's the most powerful thing in politics. It's the thing that we practice in Wisconsin. It's the thing that money can't buy, but that all of us can do. And if we do that in the places where the elections are closest, we can change everything and we can save democracy. I have a chapter called Unleash Your Superpower where I walk through exactly how to do this. And the superpower right here, everyone who's watching this online or here in the room tonight, this is something that you can do that can move a few votes. And a few votes could be all that it takes. In 2017, the state assembly majority came down to a tie. One more vote would have flipped the majority in the House of Delegates in that state. And this is not an unusual thing. I talk about my friend Andre Walton ran for Sheboygan City Council. City councils in Wisconsin, they set the budgets for election administration. How much early voting time will there be? How many polling places will there be? These are set by local offices. Andre was getting his haircut after the election, and his barber said, "What happened with your city council race?" And he said, "Well, it was tied, and I lost the random draw." And then he was like, "Did you vote, by the way?" And his barber hadn't voted. And it was a reminder that, finding that last vote can actually make all the difference, especially in these local elections where nobody's paying attention.
And again, just to connect the mirror, in Wisconsin, it has been this cauldron of what is happening in the country, of a polarized, in concrete, with these very slim margins, which is, I think, where a lot of the wisdom comes here. I want you to talk a little bit about basically something I'm sure the speaker is way too familiar with. Democrats, Republicans just want to cut taxes and get their judges in. And you talk so explicitly about how every time the Democrats get into power, and I get very upset when I hear my Democratic self-loathing circular firing squad brethren go, "Well, why we had all three branches, why didn't we protect voting?" And you talk very clearly, we would have, if not for Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema.
So this is it. So in Wisconsin,
but there's a whole slew of things that I
heard a sigh.
Would have.
I like that sigh because we're gonna take on that sigh.
Take on the sigh.
So this the plan starts with your superpower. It goes through local office, state offices, state supreme courts, all this stuff at the state and local level. But the game plan, the plan of this is the plan, it does not stop there. The plan for how we fix this mess that we're in recognizes that even when Democrats win, so many of the things that lead us to vote, that lead us to organize, they haven't happened. Now, first, that is not the fault of Democrats in the House. Speaker Emerita Pelosi has passed bills on just about everything that everyone in this room cares about through the House. If we had 3 more Democrats in the 2026 elections, the House can pass the stuff that this country needs. There's no structural barrier to doing it. Republicans, they have constant internal circular firing squads in the House. But when Democrats have House majorities, especially under the greatest speaker in American history, who's just done amazing work, the House gets it done. So the House passes the bill, and then it goes to the Senate, which is a mausoleum for good policy. And so the first thing that we have to do when we win the House and the Senate is we need to end the filibuster. And we have some friends for this idea. Now, for the people that are not clapping, it might be because you are concerned, and I get it, that if we end the filibuster, Republicans will do their terrible stuff. And there's a risk that some bad Republican bills move through. But what I document in the book, first of all, it is totally against the founding fathers' intentions. It is against American tradition. It is against every good idea about this country. And it is totally unlike how the Senate's functioned for most of American history to require 60 votes to break a filibuster to move a bill through this.
By the way, the second worst thing that Aaron Burr did.
So I would argue maybe first. He killed
maybe the worst.
2 victims, that guy. He shot Alexander Hamilton, and then he killed majority rule in the U.S. Senate.
Yeah.
I read about this. When the Senate was set up, Thomas Jefferson wrote the rule book, another great character from Hamilton. He basically did the same rules as the House. In both chambers, there was a previous question motion. You could call the previous question. I was the parliamentarian of the West High Student Council, so I know about previous question motions. Thank you. I see you. You could call the previous question simple majority vote. The bill on the floor would get a vote for final passage.
Right.
It's just how a bill became a law. And no one was really using the motion. And so Aaron Burr, in his farewell address as he was
God.
leaving the Senate, he suggested that they revise the rule book and eliminate the previous question motion. And at the time, seemed fine, whatever.
And nobody did anything.
For decades, no one noticed that there was no way to cut off debate in the Senate. The filibuster was not a thing. There was a discussion in the Continental Congress about whether to require a supermajority to pass a law, and it was roundly thrown out. The Continental Congress required supermajorities, and it was a disaster. That's part of why they set things up differently. So this idea was the opposite of the plan. And then they realized there was a filibuster in the 1830s. For 80 years, filibusters were only ever used to defeat civil rights legislation.
Right.
That was the only thing. Then there was a period when they were used for a few more things. It wasn't until Mitch McConnell that senators realized they could just filibuster everything and block any policy and slow everything down and gum up the works. Then there have been a couple changes to the rules over time. Those changes have created the world that we're in right now, where the only things that do not require 60 votes to get through the Senate happen to be the number one and number two priorities of the GOP. Tax cuts for rich people are not subject to a filibuster. There's the reconciliation rules, the one big beautiful
Simple
billionaire
majority,
bailout,
right.
Simple majority.
Because it's a budget bill, right?
It's a budget bill. So budget bills do not go through the filibuster process. And then now confirmation, Mitch McConnell changed this specific rule, confirmation for Supreme Court justices and other confirmation votes in the US Senate, also 50 votes. If you look at Project 2025, it does not require passing a single bill. The whole thing is built around the vision that the far right has, which is a president who operates like a king beyond the law, a Congress that passes tax cuts for the rich, confirms judges, and then doesn't do anything else, and a US Supreme Court that allows the president, God, Emperor, King to do whatever he wants. It is totally unlike the system of checks and balances that we all learn about in middle school.
In fact, you talk about how Madison was explicitly that the founders were explicitly aware of this danger.
Yes, they were obsessed with this danger.
Right.
I mean, this is the whole thing, is to not have a king.
Right.
And he said that it's only a republic if power comes from the great body of the people, the majority of the people. I have a chapter called How to Save Republicanism, because, we're into republicanism. It requires having majority rule to be able to make laws. And if you ask why Republicans haven't repealed the filibuster to do all the dastardly things that they want, the answer is right there. The system is working the way they want it to because it prevents restoration, expansion of democracy. It prevents the expansion of the circle of freedom, but it allows oligarchy to take hold and to mold power and the systems of power in this country so that they'll never lose control. If you think that every law other than budgets and confirmations is exactly the way that it should be for the rest of time, then you support the filibuster. If you think that maybe we could do better in some area of policy in this country, the only way to change it is to abolish the filibuster. And I think, Republicans have a bunch of terrible ideas that when they actually do them, the public hates them and they throw them out of power. Democrats have a bunch of, I think, good ideas that when we get power, we don't do them because the system blocks them from actually taking effect. So if we actually want to have a shot at carrying out the vision, the writing our values into law and building a country where everyone's rights and freedoms are protected, where everyone has a fair shot in the economy, where people can afford childcare, where everyone can get the health care that they need, all that stuff requires changing the filibuster. It should be done on day one the next time Democrats have a majority in the U.S. Senate.
And you don't want to throw away your shot. And this is the sequel to Hamilton, which is Filibuster Rhymes.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
thanks, Amy. That's mine.
there you go. So let's say we win the House and the Senate and the White House.
Yeah.
And we end the filibuster. There's a whole bunch of policies that we'll need to pass. And there's huge debates happening in primaries across the country. We'll have a presidential primary. The platform across every issue area will be information. And in this book, I'm not saying this or that faction of the Democratic Party should prevail in those debates. I am arguing that alongside everything else, we need to agree to change the system itself so we can actually do the things that we're trying to do. And it doesn't just require the filibuster, it requires reforming the United States Supreme Court. It requires term limits for Supreme Court justices. This is the other thing. And this is, I learned this painfully in Wisconsin. We keep learning it at a national level. The U.S. Supreme Court just gutted the Voting Rights Act. It overturned Roe v. Wade. It did Citizens United. It's done 1,000 different rulings, sometimes now even without writing down their reasoning. The shadow docket that just shoots down good things and rubber stamps bad things. We could win a trifecta and still not get anything done if we have this corrupt, rogue, out of control U.S. Supreme Court. So I map out in the book, this is part of the plan of This Is the Plan. We win these elective offices, and then, and this is work that everyone here can do, calling your members of Congress and senators, we make sure that Democrats are actually ready to put term limits on the U.S. Supreme Court when they have the power to do it. If we do that, and then we pass the For the People Act, a national gerrymandering ban, then in 2030, after the next Democratic trifecta has passed these laws, we can avoid going right back to 2010. And I think this is really worth realizing, as scary as this moment is, and it's a very scary moment. If we don't make structural changes, then political time will be a flat circle. We wind up having the pendulum swing of American politics swing right back into the Republican column at exactly the moment when Republicans can win at the state level and then gerrymander the living daylights out of the entire country. If they do that, they'll have control of the House. They'll try to get control of the House until 2042 by rigging the maps in 2030. Then the Electoral College will have moved south. They will have 4 more Electoral College votes in Florida and in Texas, in states that are basically run like autocracies right now. We have one shot, a shot that we can't throw away.
No, we can't.
In 2029. But if we take action then we can unrig the American political system and have a freer, fairer, better system of government than this country has ever had in our history. It's right there if we take all these steps and actually use the power once we have it to reform the system itself.
And you also talk in the book, these things, you may be sitting here and going like, oh yeah, get rid of the filibuster. Oh yeah, reform the Supreme Court. It seems Herculean and impossible and maybe even illogical or unconstitutional. But we are living under this sort of originalism idea that Republicans have said that this is the number of representatives we should have, this is the number of Supreme Court justices we should have, and just talk a little bit about how that is not true.
Yeah, so the way that these structures interact, other than the filibuster rules that have gotten rapidly worse and worse, they've kind of been flash frozen for the last half century. But for most of the history of the country, we change these things all the time. We changed the number of representatives in the U.S. House every 10 years until the 1920s. There was a constitutional amendment that came within one vote of passing that would have guaranteed that the number of representatives in the House changed. This is one of the ways that you can defeat gerrymandering, is expand the size of the House. And that means that it's harder to draw lines that exclude people and more people have representation. One of the ideas I talk about. The number of Supreme Court justices expanded and contracted over and over. It kind of got frozen after the FDR's battle with the Supreme Court that led to the approval of the New Deal, effectively. But that's been frozen for a while. The number of states, I argue that we've got to add D.C. as a state and invite Puerto Rico to have a referendum on becoming a state. We used to add states all the time. It expanded, and that changes the composition of the United States Senate. The way that we elect people has changed over and over. Wisconsin, created open primaries. These systems are not written in stone. We used to amend the Constitution all the time. One of the things I argue for is changing the way states choose their electors to the Electoral College. So at the beginning, the idea was that the electors themselves would figure out who the best presidential candidate is and elect that person president. That ended real fast. Then it was like proportional representation within the states. And then Thomas Jefferson realized that he could pass a law in Virginia to put all of Virginia's electoral college votes to the winner of that state, helped him become president. Most states do that now, winner take all at the state level. But there's another idea, which is like my favorite thing. The idea is called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact.
Oh, it's...
Listen to these people.
Yes.
All right. anyone who doesn't know about this, you are in for the nerdiest, most delectable treat of your life. So first, I should explain. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact has a very long, multisyllabic name. It has a terrible acronym, NPVIC, but I solved that problem in this book by introducing, drumroll,
It's beautiful.
a way to pronounce NPVIC, NIPVIC, which it rhymes with lipstick. We just need to spread NIPVIC across the country, and it'll be beautiful.
You're workshopping it.
Workshopping. We're workshopping.
Yeah.
You know, this is, all right, so
Yeah.
what is NIPVIC? This is a law that can be passed by state legislatures and signed into law by governors to change how they assign their electoral college votes. And the idea is this. Right now, you can lose the national popular vote and become president. Donald Trump did that, you might remember. Not so good. But if you could get enough states to represent 270 electoral college votes, which is enough to choose the president, to all jump together and say that whoever gets the national popular vote victory gets all of their electoral college votes, then the states themselves, using powers that they have under the Constitution without passing a federal law or a constitutional amendment, they can change our whole American political system to one where it's one person, one vote. Whoever wins the national popular vote becomes president.
Which sounds like really hard to do. How are we going to change that?
How could that ever happen?
But
Thank you. It's like playing wiffle ball.
Yeah.
All right. 18 states plus DC have already passed the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, including California. Good job, California. That means we're just 48 electoral college votes away from having this thing take effect. And the very states that could become Democratic trifectas in this election in 2026 and dictator-proof themselves before 2028, those states have enough electoral college votes waiting to be unleashed through NIPVIC to move the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact from being this weird curiosity buried in This Is the Plan to becoming the law of the land. If we win trifectas in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, and New Hampshire, and all of those states pass NIPVIC, then we will cross the threshold and beyond to make this country a one-person, one-vote actual democracy instead of having this charade of an electoral college that no other country in the world has ever adopted. It is right there. You can make this happen. And if we do that, it really changes everything. Like, I know how it must feel in California to be lorded over by Wisconsinites like me who actually get to cast votes that might determine the next president of the United States. And I don't want you to have to live with that. You know what I mean? It's hard for them. But we could all be equal members of this national democracy. And it would mean that presidential candidates actually have to think about what people in California want and what people in Wyoming want and what people everywhere want. It is how every other democracy in the world chooses their leaders that everybody gets to cast a ballot.
And again, it's doable, and it's doable because of what would happen in state elections.
In the state elections that no one's talking about, that there's a tiny fraction of the amount of money that's put into congressional and U.S. Senate races and even governor's races goes to these state legislative races. Elections that could come down to, in New Hampshire, a state legislative chamber in 2022 came down to 21 votes. Just recently, the entire majority in that state. This is so doable, and it's so doable just by throwing your shoulder against the wheel, getting a group of friends together, adopting some states. There's a group called the States Project that has giving circles that focus on supporting state legislative chamber flips. You should adopt Wisconsin as your state of choice. This is something that we can get done that will totally transform how presidential politics works. We can reform the way the U.S. Senate, the U.S. Supreme Court, the president, and the states work through actions on elections that are never on TV, that you now are in this extraordinary circle of brilliant political strategists. You put your time and attention there, and it changes the entire American political system.
I want you to get to whatever you want to get to. I want to ask you a couple of questions that we're getting from the audience. I'm trying to sort of put them together. Talk a little bit about what states need to do to build Democratic Party systems similar. I know each state is different, sort of legally, I think, in terms of finance and all of those things. But how do you build these things from the ground up? And talk a little bit about the Democratic Party, which has sometimes a bit of an image problem. What exactly is the Democratic Party, Ben?
Well, I have a chapter about the Democratic Party. It's called "It's My Party and I'll Cry If I Want to."
Yes.
It starts with recognizing that when people complain about the Democratic Party, and they all complain about the Democratic Party, they're talking about two different things. There is the amorphous blob of every elected official, every pundit you see on TV, all the political consultants, the most annoying person who comments on your vacation photos, telling you that you should be focused on Drumpf instead of taking a vacation. Everything that people associate with anything related to Democrats, people call that the Democratic Party. Then there's also the legal organizations that have Democratic Party in their name that have a special set of legal powers. And that's the Democratic Party that I kind of zero in on. I chaired the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. There's the Democratic National Committee. There's the Democratic Party of California. There are county parties. Sometimes there are local units within counties. Those organizations have this combination of a special kind of set of legal powers, a special kind of bank account, and then they kind of can be social organizations where people who like to be in meetings with other people who are members of the party go to, see each other, choose delegates to the national convention. And sometimes those two things are all it is. Then they can, they can approve the minutes from the previous meeting.
Right.
But also announce the time and location of the next meeting.
Right.
And sometimes that's the only thing that's going on. But it can also be a third thing, which is it can be a home for building a permanent campaign. And you can build that kind of campaign, the thing we've been talking about in Wisconsin, you can build that at any level of the party. You can see that flowering in different places. There are local Democratic parties here in California that do that kind of work. There's in North Carolina, where they lost that state Supreme Court seat by 401 votes in 2020. They have this incredible new chair, Anderson Clayton, a friend of both of ours. And she has been working in the rural areas of the state and with youth organizing everywhere in that state. They've been winning state legislative races. They've been winning down ballot races like nobody's business. They won another state Supreme Court race, even while Trump won in 2024. They won the state Supreme Court race again by 1/100th of 1% of the votes cast in the state. The Republicans tried to not seat the victor in that race. There was a titanic legal battle, and they won. This fall, if they win the state Supreme Court race, they have a path to flipping the majority in their state Supreme Court by 2028, and then ungerrymandering that state. So let's make North Carolina the next Wisconsin and win the state Supreme Court. You with me? I love it. This is something that a group of friends can totally do. A group of friends can take over a county party. They can recruit people, get involved. You can run for chair, and then you can turn it into an organizing factory. You can start getting involved in flipping city councils and flipping majorities in local boards that might right now be targeted by a local special interest, and they're not doing very much. You can change that. You can change that in the state. It is something that.
And just to say, that's how they did it.
That's how the right did it.
Ralph Reed
Yes.
did this,
Yes.
created this world, not by focusing on national elections, but by focusing on school boards.
There's been a multi-decade strategy on the right.
Yeah.
And there are places and there are organizations that now are doing this on our side, and it can make all the difference in the world. But we should recognize all of this stuff has been the GOP's playbook for years now. The America in meltdown right now that we're experiencing is the America built office by office and block by block by this Republican strategy. And I've been, as a Democratic Party chair, I've seen the majority of all the money that we raise each election cycle. When I was chair, preaching year-round organizing, the majority of the money for the entire election cycle came in after Labor Day on the even-numbered year.
Right.
That, and it's in a lot of states, it's like 90% of the money comes in the final 2 months of the election.
By the way, you created an almost membership model of the Democratic Party. And one thing, people who have resources to give them early, because it is exponentially more valuable than the late money that comes in.
Give it early and give monthly. If you can become a monthly donor, even if it's $5 a month, but great if you can add some zeros to that, it means that a party organization, a grassroots organization can hire year-round staff. And at the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, we started paying for everyone's health insurance, and then we paid for health insurance for family members.
You're communist.
And it meant that people were communist. It meant that people could actually do this for years at a time. Most people who work in these jobs, they are like 6-month, maybe 9-month jobs at the outside. Then maybe you leave politics for a few years so you can actually, save something and maybe dream of buying a place to live. It is hard to do this. It's hard to make it sustainable to do this. But there's no business operates this way.
Right.
Maybe Spirit Halloween operates this way.
Yes.
But I think we should build a party even more powerful than Spirit Halloween. That is my contention.
Beautifully put. Thank you.
And that's something that all of us can help to change and build. It takes leadership ready to do this. It is easier to get that leadership if you actually pay state party chairs.
Right.
Anderson Clayton, when she was elected, she was working at a call center and volunteering to lead the Democratic Party of North Carolina.
North Carolina.
An incredibly important battleground
state.
state. The stuff I was able to do and my predecessor chair was possible because we pay our chair in Wisconsin. Only 12 states pay their Democratic Party state chair.
And you say, how do you get somebody to do that? Why are we paying, in infrastructure? You just make sure that it's part of their contract that they raise 10 times that.
Yeah, absolutely. That was, when I came in, I had to raise a whole bunch more than my salary. And it so pays off. And then you can attract people who want to throw themselves into doing this. Think of this, again, not as one election, not as responding to a viral video that you saw that you're going to put on the air and run it 10 times. Think about actually building infrastructure that can lift up every candidate and allow you to fight harder in every race.
And a part of your community and civic life.
And if you do this, that's exactly it. We are in a loneliness crisis in this country. We spend so much time on our phones. We are being bombarded with things that make us want to curl up in the fetal position. And if we can after we sign up as monthly donors, if we can put our phones down.
After you read the texts.
After you read, those glorious texts. If you can put your phone down and actually get involved in building a party that is part of civic life, you not only win a zillion more elections and save democracy, you also save our country's soul by connecting us to one another again. And that is work that benefits all of us. And it's not even work.
I want to get to some of these. I'm worried about time. Quick thoughts, ranked choice voting.
I'm into it. I look.
Into it.
There's a bunch of different ideas that are in use in different places. This is a laboratory of the states thing. Alaska has ranked choice voting, and that's part of how Mary Peltola won the House race and will win the United States Senate race. I think it's great to try different stuff in different places, and great stuff can bubble up. So yeah, let's give it a shot.
A lot of these you've answered. I'm not ignoring them. I want to emphasize one thing that I don't think we have made clear, which is Wisconsin in 2016 was pretty much exactly where Florida was. Correct?
Yeah, Florida was. Wisconsin and Florida were the two states with the closest governor's races in 2018.
Right.
They were both, swing states up for grabs that were dominated by the right. The whole bunch of states that got rigged by the right after 2010 have turned into what are seen as permanently red states.
Right. And this work in Wisconsin really prevented that. I just want to emphasize that.
I appreciate that.
That it works.
But right now, this year, a bunch of those states could turn blue. Iowa, Wisconsin and Iowa used to be like this. Iowa got super red. Wisconsin has stayed almost perfectly on a knife's edge because of this constant work we've done. Right now, Democrats have won 17 of the last 21 statewide elections in Wisconsin. But like half of those have been by 1 percentage point or less. We are right on a knife's edge. In Iowa, Democrats have been losing by double digits over and over and over. But this year, we could win the governor's race, the attorney general's race, 3 U.S. House seats. We can make dramatic gains in the state legislature. This is a year of opportunity because everyone is so off about everything that is happening. So expand the map and fight and win. This is year to go for it. And we can build a lot more Wisconsins. And also, let's keep building in Wisconsin.
Yes. And I think the thing to emphasize, and what I love about this book and what I love about the work that you do is it's a reminder. Despair is a luxury the future cannot afford, And action is the antidote to despair. And there is joy and connection in it, and I can't emphasize that enough. I think people recoil from political work because of, I don't know, grim
People
conflict.
don't want to get their heart broken. And I get that. But the reality is that hope comes from action. Hope, you don't have to start hoping and then take action. Even when you feel like nothing's going to work, if you actually go out and do something, you start feeling better right away. And then when you have this experience, especially of being, part of a group of people that, kept going even when it seemed like hope was lost and there was no way that you could win, and you kept pushing, and then you win by a fraction of 1 percentage point, which is the kind of thrill ride that Wisconsin specifically can offer you. It feels so great. There's no greater thrill to being part of a group of people that fights through impossible odds and then wins by a margin so small that you can tell that what you did helped make that possible. One of the greatest feelings in the world. It is the healthiest addiction that you will ever find. And we're in a moment where, just beyond any previous period in American history, everything depends on a tiny, tiny number of votes. I write in the book, and I did the math on this. There's never been a period in American history where there's been a change in the presidency, which party has control of the presidency and the House and the Senate, as much as this period right now. Every election's a changed election. Every election comes down to these tiny little margins. Since the year 2000, there have been more changeovers than before or after the Civil War and Reconstruction, before or after the Civil Rights Movement. All the big tectonic shifts, they have these periods of intense struggle, and then there's a big shift to a new political order. And we have been stuck on a knife's edge now since the year 2000, the closest, one of the two closest presidential elections in American history. And it's going to eventually go one way or the other. And the reason why it hasn't shifted one way or the other is because our systems are stuck. They veto any kind of real change that allows one party to build an enduring majority. Republicans get in, and over they screw everything up.
Yes.
And people throw them out on their ass. This happened with George W. Bush, global economic meltdown. It happened with Trump last time, the COVID pandemic. He terribly mismanaged it. And then Democrats come in, and we do some amazing stuff that changes people's lives. But we can't do all the stuff because our systems right now are stuck. They block us from being able to unrig the American political system and deliver for working people in all the ways that all of us are fighting for. But if we can change the system to actually get those changes through, we can look back to the New Deal coalition and think about how to build an enduring majority that works for everyone, because people can see that we've made a tangible difference in their lives. They will fight to defend. If we can make those kinds of changes, Democrats won't win every election, but things that right now are contested in every election will become the agreed upon bedrock for American life, that everyone should have some basic guarantees for their freedoms and their economic security. That can be something that future generations look back and cannot believe was up for grabs politically. The same way right now, kids can't really imagine a world where you can get rejected from health insurance because you were sick before. It seems preposterous. There's so much about American life right now, the economic precarity that people feel, where the bottom could fall out at any moment. We can change that and change it for good. That is the goal. That's how we end America's meltdown.
I'm out of time. We hit a lot of these questions. We didn't get to all of them. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for making me more proud of my home state, and for nationalizing what that state has been through that is so instructive and so vital to making this country live up to its spectacular, unfulfilled potential. So I thank you.
Bradley, thank you. Can I close here by just asking, how many people here have ever run for office themselves or are running for office right now? Can you raise your hand? Can you look around? Can we give a round of applause to all those people who've run? And can I ask also, How many people here have you ever volunteered in an election or chipped in to help someone get elected? Can we see the hands right now? Look around. This room has so much power to actually make this plan work, and you're here because you're part of the fight. And I hope that, like, if you felt something tonight, if you felt something in any one of those fights, remember that as dark as it is right now, the power to change all of that is right here and in your circle of friends and in the work that you're going to do. So for everything you've already done and for the fights that you're going to join to make this plan and so many big plans a reality, thank you so much, San Francisco. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bradley Whitford. Thank you, Speaker Pelosi. Let's win.
Read the book. Thank you.